Good morning. I hope you're all well today. Welcome to the media panel discussion. We have some really great panelists here, and we hope to really get in depth about new media versus traditional media and impact in Nigeria, understanding where we are and also where we're going to. My name is Elizabeth. I am the brand manager for Moet Hennessy. I manage all the champagnes for Moet Hennessy in Nigeria. I have over 15 years of marketing experience totally, and also using a variation of new media, traditional media. I mean, in marketing, we've seen that things have really changed rapidly. Even social media is not up to 10 years old. So definitely marketing strategies have had to evolve at really rapid rates. So we'll get into that. I want to introduce our panelists. I'm going to ask Preston to introduce yourself, where you're from, just give us a little bit of background.
Wonderful. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Preston Ide. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Steers. Steers is a digital information company based out of Lagos. Our mission is to make it easy for anyone, anywhere in the world to access high quality information in Africa. We publish Steers Business, which is an online digital publication focused on finance, the economy, and technology in Nigeria. Very glad to be here and look forward to having a very interesting conversation about the future of media. Thank you.
Excellent. I believe we also have Ogo on the line.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. My name is Okiti, and I'm the Managing Director of Business Day Media Limited here in Lagos. And I mean, Business Day, established in 2001, is the premier business content publication for Nigeria and West Africa. So we publish both print and online. And so I'm very delighted and happy to join you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ogo. Okay, do we have any other panelists on the line? Timmy, you can let me know. Or else we can just jump into the questions.
I am on.
Actually, this is quite, oh, hey, Lanre.
Hello, sorry. I blocked the pop-up on my computer, so I wasn't able to kind of log in, but I'm in now.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I don't know if anyone else can hear.
Can you guys hear me?
Very well.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Lanre, introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, Lanre Masha. I'm the GM of music and editorials at Trace in West Africa.
Wonderful. Any other panelists on the line? Well, this is a good group because the first question I wanted to ask was just around new media in comparison to traditional media. And we sort of have both sort of opposing sides. We have traditional media on the line, we have digital innovation. We also have a mix of the two with Trace. So each of you, maybe Mr. Ogo, you can start. What's your view on new media in comparison to traditional media today?
Well, thank you very much. I think there are very, very key and key fundamental differences. Let me put it this way. The first one is that new media compared to traditional media is largely more democratic and largely more accessible. So previously, maybe 20, 30 years ago, everyone will rely on the traditional media to bring them the news. But these days, I mean, even non-core journalists can just supply the news. So it is largely accessible compared to traditional media. And of course, it is cheaper to access compared to traditional media. That's the first one. I think the other things is around convenience, faster, lighter, easily retrievable, because it can also be easily stored. So when you compare traditional media with new media, you see all these things. The new is more convenient, the new is faster, the new is easily retrievable. So these are very, very key differences. Another one is that information, and that's probably the difference between what I would call journalism and just pushing out information. While information is relatively cheaply accessible in new media, it does not necessarily mean facts and context are easily accessible. So one needs to also bear that in mind. And then I think the final difference is that while traditional media was largely localized, new media is global. I mean, I can just be here on my table, send a text message, and it's in the US. I mean, the same thing, I can just share a WhatsApp message, and before you know it, is in the US. So in terms of the publication, the content, it was largely localized, but now it is global. I mean, those are the fundamental differences between new media and traditional media. Thank you.
Thank you. Preston?
Yes, so to be very honest, I think we're maybe in a transition, and obviously there are many publications that would be easily classified as traditional media and some that would be classified strictly as new media. But I think there are many publications and many information outlets that are somewhere in the middle, and that would be the classic publication that has both a sort of print arm as well as a digital arm. I think most print publications now have a digital component to them, and so I think we are seeing everyone sort of moving to the middle. Although there are many digital publications that are necessarily going print, I think one of the big distinguishing factors between traditional media and new media is essentially distribution, right? So how do you primarily distribute your information? And that is where digital players leverage technology. That is where they leverage the internet. That is where they essentially leverage channels that make it very cost effective to reach a large number of people, right, very quickly. So you think about the sort of business model and the cost base to run a traditional media outlet, and you're talking about sort of printing press, you're looking at, distribution, because you're looking at a whole lot of infrastructure that doesn't exist for many digital media publications. So from that perspective, you see how very quickly and over a relatively short period of time, the cost of setting up a digital media publication has dropped significantly compared to the cost of setting up a print publication. And with that, that brings a certain kind of thinking into the space. So you have people who do not, or you have organizations with a different view of the world, a different view of how information should be shared, whether it should be paid for or not paid for. And it's really, really very different. I think this also reflects in the business models in terms of, where the revenues come from. Print advertising, for instance, was significantly more lucrative than digital advertising is today. And, the reliance or the presence of big players like, Facebook, Twitter, Google are in direct competition with digital media publications, although they are not in direct competition with sort of print, if you think about print distribution channel. So I think distribution is really at the core of the distinction. But like I said, I do think that traditional media is stepping up and really has stepped up to a large extent, going online. And there's more to see about how that will play out in the future.
Yep, agreed. And so when I think about traditional media platforms that have sort of made that transition, it's almost like the lines between traditional media and new media are blurred because these companies are evolving. And one example I would say of that is with Trace. Lanre, so can you tell me or tell us how well you think the industry in general has been doing with adapting to new media, and if there's any existing limitations when it comes to execution?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think just to answer your last question first, I think the limitation essentially is pricing, right? Pricing, because the cost of data is still relatively high for the mass population, right? So to shift to digital is not an easy shift, A few people, as kind of mentioned, distribution, you have a wide net when you distribute on digital. You can reach way more people, right? So you don't necessarily have to localize and focus on the local market. But if we think from a local standpoint, the cost of data is still so high that it's not an easy transition just to say we are leaving traditional media right away, right? I think we're still a few years away from that actually happening. But the good balance that we've been able to find is to still continue with our linear television that we still have, which is traditional television, and start to pivot a little bit more into the digital space, right? Because you have to decide: do you want to can you afford to pay not only for the data and also subscribe, right? Because that's the only model that for you to be able to actually to monetize the commercial side of it, and that subscription model, it still hasn't stuck yet to me, especially in Nigeria. It hasn't stuck yet completely, right? Because people are still turning on their data just to use the internet, right? They'll turn it off when they not when they don't need to. So the model is still there's still a lot of potential for it to grow, essentially.
Yes, and Mr. Ogo, would you agree with that as a business that's also been transitioning to leverage new media platforms?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we media, especially for businesses such as ours, you have to rely extensively on scale. So if you're going to have scale, then you need also a scaled number to be able to access the content that you put out. So what Lanre has just said basically is, if you look at in terms of cost, okay, still expensive. Of course, still expensive in relative to the average income. So that's one. So when you look at accessibility, there's no doubt about it that you have to think of cost. But there are other limitations. I think there are also cultural limitations, especially for those of us that actually want to, that want the public to pay for content. There are cultural limitations, and some people will say, oh, why should I pay for something that I think I can access free? And of course, that brings a whole new challenges. How do you differentiate your own value proposition from other publications? What's your business model? How do you get the revenue? Where do you get it from? Combination of advertisement and content, or largely content, no advertisement. So there are a lot of mixed options that one can do. But yes, of course, limitation, anything that does not allow us to scale very, very quickly, the way the whole world has scaled is definitely an issue for the media space in Nigeria, both old and new.
Yeah, I would say those are definitely limitations culturally, how to generate revenue from these platforms. Mr. Ogo, earlier in the first question, you mentioned something about the sort of credibility of the news that you can find online or with new media. We saw this a lot with the outbreak of coronavirus. There was a lot of fake news spreading. And I think in some of our businesses, even before this, it's been sort of hard to control the narrative when people can sort of just take any story and run with it, because no one is really holding anyone to standards when it comes to publishing online. So with the wake of the pandemic, we say that traditional media seems to face the biggest casualty. So people are moving away from those traditional media platforms, and mainly because they just don't have access to it, right? During the lockdown, we just couldn't go out to purchase the newspapers, the magazines. So we see a lot of people are migrating online. The future of traditional media is unclear. So what are your thoughts regarding this? Keeping in mind that media businesses are now facing...
Yes, I think, let me actually pull this in context. The first thing to note is, following every economic crisis, and we can go way back, following every economic crisis, there's always a shrinking of the media space. So whenever you have economic crisis, when you come after that, there's always going to be a shrinking of the media space. And that is already happening again, not only in Nigeria, but also globally. So some traditional media spaces and some even new media spaces, they're already collapsing because they could not respond to the economic crisis, or they could not provide sufficient growth before the economic crisis came. So that's always the case, that we always have a shrinking of the media space whenever there's an economic crisis. So that itself leads to uncertainty. So the uncertainty stems for, like the one I've said before, cultural issues. You're wondering, okay, with the Nigerian consumer, for instance, respond to the way in which they have responded in the US and in the UK. So when you read every media report, you will see that there are still some peculiarities even within nations. For instance, let me give you like the US, for instance, there's been a very, very good response to online and payments for subscriptions content. So when you talk about the New York Times doing 6 million, you talk about the Atlantic doing over 1 million. In the UK, you have Financial Times doing 1 million, the Telegraph doing 400,000. So the culture in those places, they've actually responded. Are they responding yet? Yes, but will it be the same level or the same way of response? We are not sure yet, so that is uncertain in that respect. Now, how do media space respond in Nigeria to this uncertainty? There are 3 things we have seen here in Business Day. We have seen the one that they want to go subscription. I mean, and that's the model that we are going to. That's the readers essentially pay for the content. And I think Steers is doing the same thing. Then you have the Guardian, some people that are following the Guardian UK. I think Premium Times is doing that. That is their receiving voluntary contributions from readers. So that's those that support them. Then the third model that we have seen responding to this uncertainty is media houses are at least asking for the data of the people that come on their site, either through cookies or through other means, for them to register. So these uncertainties will continue. But what is sure is this, and this is not uncertain, what is sure is that media houses traditionally, and I might even say new media, cannot rely going forward for the sanctity of advertisement income they have enjoyed in the last 20, 30, 40 years. We cannot continue to rely on that. So that is one thing that we are sure about. So those changes will happen. How and when those changes will be completed, we don't know yet.
Okay. I'm just going to divert a little bit. We have another panelist that just joined the session, Ayeni Ekundayo.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You can just briefly introduce yourself, and then we can continue with the discussion. We also have a question from online.
Okay, so my name is Ayeni Ekundayo. I've been doing digital transformation and supporting policies for digital across board for the past few years. I think about 9 years now.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining. The question here that we have from the chat, are there any set government policies that regulate the traditional media platforms? And then I would also add on this, that also regulate new media platforms. That's for anyone.
Okay, maybe I should just give a shot at that. There are a lot of regulations for the traditional media platforms. In terms of news and communication, we know the broadcasting corporations and broadcasting laws that goes around that. We have the people around the bond, which is the people who control the conversation. We also have the one for digital. We have laws around the digital system, which NILDA is trying to get around now, about data protection, access to information, when you can access those information. NCC is doing a bit in terms of the other side of communication. And then for the creative space, we also have the people from APCON who controls the kind of ads you see, the communication you see, and all of that. So we have all that regulation that goes with the AAA in terms of the kind of organization that can play certain kind of ads on radio, on TV. So we have all of that for the traditional side. For the digital, it's still a bit porous. We just have all these regulations that talk about more financial protection. Conversations are going on. not around the core content, except for maybe the government talking around what they call it now, this fake news thing. That's the only thing the government has tried to address. But the times of framework that we need to work with, we are not there yet.
I would say no one is there yet. The next question is, how can the spread of false information be addressed with the advent of new media? And I know that this is something that they struggle with abroad. Is the algorithm, you build this algorithm, it's sort of out of control. You can't really figure out how to prevent people from seeing fake news. But does anyone have anything to say about that? False information, how do we address it with the advent of new media?
Can I contribute on this now? So, when you talk about new media, you understand that there's so many issues with control, and which is why this is actually a major issue as well. And that is why when the government came up and started saying things about regulating and all that, people fought against this because the people who it matters to, they know that it is necessary. Business Day would agree with such a rule or law because it now knows that it is protected by its information and make sure that somebody else, a blogger somewhere in his room, is not just putting out information on the internet that is not true. Because Business Day has paid people to do the right research, the right work, so that the real information is put out. Now, how to make this happen? It is not something that is achievable in 1 year and 2 years and whatnot, except you now start limiting people's access or freedom of expression, because that is where they always hide under. They'll say we have access to put information out there. Now, the only way that I see is fact checking. Now, if the government or the regulatory bodies can put in place a system where what we have in traditional media, which is gatekeeping. So, in traditional media, there are usually editors, there's editors guild, right? That they fact check every information put out by newspapers, by television stations, by radio stations. Once you go against the rule, once you do something wrong, you get fined, you can lose your license and all of that. So if we can introduce that as well now to digital media, to blogs, to websites, to social media, that is something that will definitely happen. So say, for example, a blogger in his room decides to post something on his blog and then it goes viral. Once the gatekeeping organization or body sees this, they suspend your account. You can no longer post for a period of 1 year or all of that kind of arrangement. So that's my contribution to that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Dio. Another question from the group. Don't you think that new media is leaving some people, for example, those that don't have access to the internet, out of the loop? And then on the same vein, what are the odds of implementing new media in areas where people don't have access to the internet? So there are definitely people that are being left out. They don't have access. How do we reach them? This question for anyone on the panel.
I think the question we should ask ourselves is this: should anyone not have access to the internet? I mean, everyone should have access to the internet. I think we have to understand that in the year 2020, access to internet is not some kind of luxury. It's part of education, it's part of career, it's part of relationship. I mean, you just need access to the internet. Of course, what you do with it is a different thing entirely, but everyone needs access to the internet. And if you look at the global countries we are trying to compete with or we are trying to reach, they understand this and they have tried to ensure that everyone has access to the internet. And of course, you can then begin to say, okay, what do you want to do on the internet? That's another matter. So in Nigeria, access to the internet is still a great deal of problem. I mean, it's still a great deal of challenge. As Lanre said before, the cost of accessing the internet, that's the cost of data. And even for some people, it's not just about cost. It's actually that they cannot even afford the tool or the device to even access the internet. So their limitations of integrating into the global economy is actually very, very limited. So you have someone doing agriculture maybe somewhere in my village in Delta State, and the person cannot access internet to even to learn the best practice for his crop, something like that. You have a village student, maybe somewhere in Nasarawa, and the person cannot research something on the internet. So when we look at internet, we should not look at it in the context of luxury. It is actually a basic necessity. So, and that is why you find out that in today's Nigeria, you have people that are leaving universities, and some of them don't even still know how well they can use the internet to improve themselves. This is the age where you don't really need to go to Harvard to read Harvard materials. You don't need to go to INSEAD to read INSEAD materials. You don't need to go to, you don't even have to be to New York to understand the landscape of New York. So that the internet is just most powerful. Let's just say, look, let the government do what they need to do and ensure that everyone has access to the internet.
Yeah, and I echo that point, that I think accessibility to the internet is something that everybody needs to have access to, right? Because I think it's a great equalizer, because you can easily learn anything that you want to learn on the internet, literally by YouTubing and doing. But you don't become a practitioner by just going to the internet. You actually have to do the craft to learn, to be able to get better at it. But then I caution that a little bit, because the Achilles heel to everybody coming to the internet is because ignorant people also get on the internet when that happens, right? And that's when false information starts spreading. That's when people without knowledge of how journalism is done or how stories are being told. And because everything is happening in real time on the internet, literally, like everything is happening in real time, information can spread within 24 hours, can cause chaos within 24 hours. Right? You can have false information about David Doe having a baby, or David Doe slapped somebody that probably never happened, right? And before you know it, that information has been carried and 1 million people have retweeted it, and before it's become actually a news story. So, so as we welcome everybody to internet, as internet becomes accessible to everybody, I think what's important also, I think that fundamentally, I think as a nation, we need to improve our learning process and our educational system so people can understand how to use this tool to their advantage.
So it sounds like what's being said here. It's not necessarily, so yes, everyone needs access, but in the process of giving everyone access, we need to make sure that systems are put in place to restrict fake news from the platform. But then again, there is still freedom of speech, so not the easiest task there.
There's this usually when we talk about fake news, there's this small advantage that is usually not mentioned. It has actually benefited media. Many people may not understand it, but it has actually benefited traditional media. I mean, online, obviously, because people now know that, okay, for me to read what I think is factual or in proper context, or to have some kind of understanding of some issues, then I have to go back to people that are trained to provide that, which are the journalists. It doesn't mean they are perfect, but at least a journalist, just as Dio said, you can't just publish anything in Business Day, for instance. I mean, there are processes, there are structures for which we publish our news and our information. So it has actually benefited the media. Most of the rise in subscriptions that you see in the last 10 years is actually in response to fake media. So people now say, okay, if I read this news, where is the source? What is the source? So if the source is just some random blogger somewhere, nobody really believes it. Oh, but if New York Times reports it, oh, if the Atlantic reports it, okay, because they have done their research, they have gone through their processes, so there's an element of fact and context when they do report it.
Sure. What I would like to quickly add to what Larry has said as regards the device, the cost of data, is also the education. Now, while you have mentioned that when you put out this information, people can always verify through the source. If it's business day, if it's trace, we can believe that they've done their own work. But when you bring in education into the context, then you understand that a lot of people do not know that that is even a thing. They don't know that it's something that you need to confirm where you're getting this information from to know that you should agree with it or not. So I randomly get a pop-up notification, xyzblogspots.com says Davido is pregnant. Because of my level of education and exposure, I easily dismiss. I'll probably not even get such a pop-up because it must have been I've visited somewhere to sign up to that kind of information. But somebody who is a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old who has a mobile device in some remote area will see this information, and the next thing is gone out and he believes it because, he saw it online. Now, quickly, traditional media and new media will have to work together. Now, your previous question as regards leaving people out who are in remote areas and that would not have access to new media because of internet, because of device, right? If you remember, sir, back in the days, we have community newspapers. So a one-pager can serve a small remote area. So imagine if newspapers or outlets now decide that they go way down, apart from just going at the top. Okay, let's service the upwardly mobile people who can pay for subscription. Imagine you send a reporter, a well-trained reporter to Lokoja or to Nasarawa, who you pay a minimum, say 20K, 30K at the end of every month, and you give confirmed, verified information that is printed out in community newspaper format. It will cost you less, but you'd have done a great job, and business day would even be more followed or accepted in those areas. It's just something that's run in my head, but it's also a way that we can understand that while new media will take up the emerging masses, the upwardly mobile people, traditional media still has a role to play in the remote areas.
Can I just lean in there a little bit? I think there are some almost existential questions that all media platforms need to answer, because what we've talked about and what Mr. Akiti has really mentioned is this role of media as sort of trust intermediaries, right? So when a publication, a well-respected publication says X, right, it goes with some sort of authority. And we believe it because we understand or we appreciate sort of work that went into putting out that information. I think that is a mindset that is not necessarily universal across all media platforms. So it's easy to point out the big platform, the business, the premium time that sort of think in that way, right? But new media is a very fragmented space, right? There's so many publications, so many blogs, so many people trying to get out there, right? And we still have to answer the question of what is the purpose of media? And I say this because we have a lot of these discussions in our sort of editorial room, and we really see it as information, right? In fact, I like to say that we are in the information services space, right? The goal is to inform, it is to educate, it is really to put all that very, very valuable insight out there. I don't believe that goal currently matches the one, business models that are being used to further it. And two, I don't think that goal is necessarily adopted by everyone. So what do I mean by the business models? If you think about the reliance on advertising to prop up most media companies, you can see how when advertising the primary source of revenue, for any company, right, money comes in primarily from sort of two ways. If it's not investors, then it's your customer. If your customers are primarily advertisers, then your entire organization will be designed to serve them. Now, in an environment where you're designed to serve advertisers, distributing information, accurate information, is not necessarily the goal. The goal is to distribute information, right, that amasses as many people as possible, so that those people can then be sold on to the advertisers, right? It's actually a model that is designed to sell the eyeballs of the people you attract. Now, in that sort of environment, you can see how the content you are then trying to push out, right, it's not necessarily designed to really inform, to really educate. No, it's designed to bring people in, because my real customers, the advertisers, need as many people on my platform as possible. So you see, this grand goal we have around information, around education, around being the trust intermediary, it's very difficult if the business model is not designed to support it. Right? And then you think about thinking, we talk about, blogs, we talk about so many different platforms. When, someone random, goes onto the internet and says, I want to start my own publication, I want to start with that information, what do they even consider as their goal, right? Most people see it as, I need to optimize for SEO, right? I need to put out some information that will get, many people onto my site because that is how I make money. They don't make money directly from the user. Now, of course, there are many questions, especially around exclusion, once you start trying to ask people to pay for information, right? But the thing with direct reader revenue, as existed, for instance, with newspapers, where people actually paid for the newspapers, don't forget, right? That model, people are still paying for the newspapers, unlike online when nobody pays, and so the publisher, the editor, almost forgets that direct relationship. But once you bring that relationship back into the fold, right, you start to ask yourself, right, how valuable is my information? Is it valuable enough for people to even want to pay? Or if you look at the sort of Guardian premium time model, to support it? Because I think the media industry sort of excludes itself from this very fundamental fact about any business, which is that the ultimate proof of value is a customer who's willing to pay. That is a well-known fact in every business, right? But in the media space, perhaps because of the legacy approach we have taken, or even in many cases, the fear that our content or our information is not valuable enough, people start to shy away from that reality, shy away from asking the reader. But you see, once you reestablish that direct link with the reader, you find yourself doing everything to optimize for the reader. I think even with Steers, the way we think about it, and we know, our fee, for instance, is premium and expensive, but we find many people are willing because they appreciate the value. Now, that does not necessarily solve the scale problem in terms of getting out to, 6 million people like you've seen with the New York Times, right? But what it does design is an organization that understands that its core purpose is to really inform people rather than satisfy advertisers. And you build a different kind of beast when you do that. So I think that's just really important, putting at the center what we are trying to do here. And if people don't necessarily think that that is the goal, right, then that is when you will see a different kind of organization being designed.
That was very insightful. Thank you. I want to switch gears and then also start rounding up. And we can't leave this topic out when we're talking about media in general, and that's content. We see that people have evolved, platforms have evolved, and also the content that we're seeing and absorbing every single day on these platforms has evolved. Is the quality of content being threatened due to the rapid transformation? Has quality of content on all of these platforms?
Okay, let me come in there.
Mm-hmm.
Ian Kadiba is the name, Executive Director of Media Investment for Media Ratio MD, the media independent outfit. But I just need to state the fact that we need to put this in perspective. When we talk of the traditional media, I think it's important that we need to look beyond print, because there's also the radio, there's also the TV leg. Yes, I know you mentioned something earlier about people being deprived access to, maybe because they are not able to go out during the COVID period, they don't have access to the print. But you find out that many of them are at home and they have their earbuds and hear the eardrum ready for information. The TV and radio that was supposed to provide the kind of content they were looking for, many of those people were actually deprived. And what did we see? We see a gradual shift for the likes of Netflix, another paid platform. That for me is instructive. It shows us clearly that people know what they want. If you are not giving them what they desire, they'll move elsewhere. So in terms of quality, people are becoming more discerning, because with the digital age, you cannot limit them. If you don't give it to them locally, they go international and source what they need to look for. And that is instructive. Many of us, in fact, for me, the COVID period was actually a major exposure of how the threat of content on our traditional media, particularly for some of the radio and TV, because people get bored. You have a situation where some of the TV stations were even repeating drama that people have watched over time. They immediately moved over. So meaning that, and that shows clearly that we have a job cut out for us. The traditional media space is going to be a collaborative effort, but they have their job cut out for them. People are beginning to be more discerning. Yes, I hear you. Maybe the data is still a major problem, but somebody said something earlier, but I thought that people have a way of switching on, switching off. If I know what I want to watch, even if I need to pay a premium to get it, Nigerians, you can't stop them. They will find a way to get there. But then the question is, do we have the quality of content that they desire? And that's one thing that we need to focus on, really, to make sure that we uplift our game, really. Because if we are not able to provide it locally, those consumers, they are more designed, and nobody wants to be taken aback. Nobody wants, these days, nobody wants to be left behind. Everybody wants to be at the top of their game. So it's important. That content, we have a whole lot to do in that space more. Even for the print journalism, really, a whole lot more things need to be done. I hear you, digital space, the new media, you can't beat them when it comes to speedy release of information. But the question now is, after releasing the information, there's the story behind the story. Where is our investigative skill? Where is the investigative strategy? I say, okay, fine, you've gotten the information. This happened at maybe somebody slapped somebody somewhere, but what is the story behind it? That story behind it will continue to enable us to lift our game. That people will continue to say, hey, I've heard this news, but I know if I go to this particular source, I'm going to hear beyond what I've heard on the digital space. And that's one thing that we need to keep the flag flying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And then last question here, and this one is actually to Lanre directly. How does a traditional music medium such as Trace hope to compete with digital platforms like Apple Music, YouTube Music, and Spotify? And I would assume that had a lot to do with quality of content.
Yeah, so I need to kind of answer. I want to just chime in on the last question because it's about content, and I'm a firm believer, and there's a saying that's been going around that context is content is king, right? Because when you have good content, is king. But I also I want to add one layer to that. Context is God, right? If content is king, context is God, right? Because I think it's important for people to understand the context of whatever content that you're putting out, and understand the strategy that you take to put out your content, right? Because there's a lot of fast-paced content. There's your Insta blogs and your fast-paced content, and there's your business day and traditional. So the context of how they write their story is completely different from that. They still putting out information, as Preston said, right? It's sharing information, right? And the context of the information is a little bit different. Now, to go into the question, how do we plan to compete? I think for us is, I think, moving closer to more to real time, right? Because because where we play is music videos, and that's our bread and butter, right? And with YouTube in the game, they've gotten quicker. They've gotten quicker to putting content out, right? So as an artist, I can literally sit in my living room, upload a video to YouTube, and millions of people can view it in one instant, right? So that works. But as a consumer, that becomes daunting. If a million people upload music to YouTube, I need to find the music. So it becomes a little more daunting. So the need for playlisting and curation is still needed, right? So that's the difference. And you can see even for YouTube, who might be the closest direct competitor versus Spotify and Apple, because they more focus on just the audio files and the streaming side of it. But I'll say YouTube first. They're also trying to shift into the model where you actually pay subscription and they curate your playlist for you, because that's the advantage that we have as thought leaders in the music industry. It's almost like the curation of our playlist is what makes it different. Because as the end consumer, the truth is the end consumer is lazy, right? They don't want to search, and they don't want to go through this, and they want this music given to them, and they want it to be able to be curated. Like, at the end of the day, I don't want to search for a million songs. I just want to know this is the songs that are popping right now, and that's what I like. Right. So I think that's the way we compete is through curation and putting context in the context that we create, right? And focusing on that.
Can I just sort of chip in on this as well around content?
Okay, Preston, but I'll let you have 1 minute and we have to wrap up.
All right, no problem. I think we're all sort of from the media space here, and I think one thing we always need to remind ourselves and remind the audience is that good quality content, whether it's print, whether it's TV, whether it's radio, is expensive. Right? It is expensive. I feel like, because of the very close association between media and broader societal goals in terms of information, accessibility, all of that, people start to forget that, this is still a business, right? We're still running businesses. And so you want to distribute, high quality content to all corners of Nigeria. It costs money, right? And that's reality. It's not as if today in media industries, being hit from all sides with dollars and euros from everywhere, right? So it is expensive. And I think the audience also needs to appreciate that, because the more funding that media companies come across, right, the better they will be able to, I mean, Netflix, these guys are on a different budget. So, comparing our own local player to people running with, millions of paying subscribers in dollars, it's a different ballgame. So just to, last thing, if anyone should take from here, is that good quality content is expensive. And so that has to be appreciated, so that, media players don't seem wicked when they start asking people to pay. No, we're trying to do our job well, but good quality content is expensive.
That's the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. This was a really great conversation. Wish we had more time. And the audience, thank you so much for your questions. Looking forward to a part 2, hopefully. And let's make magic. I mean, I guess we are all the decision makers. We are all the movers and shakers in this industry. So everything that we need to make happen, let's make happen. Yeah, visit steers.ng for more. Your plug, I thought that was coming from the group, and you made me say it. All right, have a great day, everyone. Stay blessed.
All right, thank you. All right,
hey, Preston, give me access to Stairs, please.
All right, I'll raise that. All right, guys, thank you so much.
All right.